April 9th, 2018 began like every other day in Wadsworth, Ohio. But things took a dark turn when police got a call about a missing woman. The family of 98-year-old Margaret Douglas called the authorities because they had not heard from her in a few days and were worried about her. Unfortunately, what started out as a welfare check went on to become one of the most horrific cases Wadsworth had ever seen. When police arrived at her house, Margaret was not there. They immediately began to search the premises for any clues of her whereabouts. It would take a few hours for them to make a truly horrifying discovery. What happened to Margaret? How did she die? Why did it take so long to find her? Margaret Douglas was a strong, lively, and independent woman, and this didn't change as she grew older. After the death of her husband, she was forced to live alone, and this meant she had to carry out many tasks on her own. By the time she turned 91, Margaret was well known and loved by everyone in her neighborhood. Her closest family members were her nephew, Howard Leisure, and his wife, Cindy. The couple lived 40 minutes away from her house, but they would often visit her to help with stuff, and also make sure she was doing okay. Apart from her family, Margaret's neighbors also looked out for her and helped her in any way they could. Margaret would often speak of how she enjoyed her independence and was looking forward to her 100th birthday. However, her life was suddenly cut short, and it marked the beginning of a mystery that shocked the neighborhood. On the morning of April 9th, 2018, Howard was worried about Margaret because he hadn't heard from her in a few days. A friend of Margaret's had also said that they hadn't seen her in a few days as well. Left with no other choice, Howard called the police to check in on her. When the police got to Margaret's home, they knocked and knocked, but got no answer, so they went into the house to make sure she was well. Upon entering the house, there was no sign of Margaret. The cops called out her name several times, but got no response. Faced with the reality that Margaret had gone missing, the police began searching the area and asking neighbors if they had seen her. When they didn't get any useful information from the neighbors, the officers began to call her hospital friends. They also started visiting places she loved to visit, yet they couldn't find her. At this point, the search had become more intense, so Howard and Cindy drove down to Margaret's home to help the police find her. The couple knew Margaret well, so the police were hoping that they could take a look at the house and point out anything that looked abnormal. Howard and Cindy did know Margaret well, and so they knew that if she had left the house, she definitely took her red wallet and wore the one pair of shoes she loved wearing everywhere. When they took a look at the house, they didn't find anything out of the ordinary. The house was clean and well kept, and they did discover that Margaret's red wallet and favorite shoes were gone. As they looked around the house, Howard decided to check the closet because Margaret sometimes kept her shoes there. Unknown to him, this decision would lead to a horrifying discovery. As he looked into the closet, Howard saw Margaret's shoes lying beneath a pile of clothes. As he moved to pick up the shoes, he realized that they were connected to cold feet. And that was how Margaret's lifeless body was found. An immediate examination of the body pointed out a number of clues that would help determine the cause of her death. The first thing the police noticed was that Margaret's clothes looked torn, which led them to believe that she had been sexually assaulted. They also noticed that there was a lot of trauma to her neck, as well as bruises to her face and head, indicating that she was most likely killed by manual strangulation. The last shocking discovery was that, by every indication, Margaret's body had been lying in her closet for a few days. If Margaret's neighbors loved her as much as they claimed, then who would have killed her in such a brutal manner? The police suspected that this was a case of burglary that had got out of control, and so they searched the house for fingertips or DNA that would point them to the killer. Unfortunately, there were no traces of any strange DNA or fingerprints found around the house. What they found instead was a pair of disposable gloves in Margaret's backyard. The gloves were immediately taken in for DNA testing. Margaret's DNA was found on them, but there was also an unidentified DNA present. Further investigations led the police to a man named David. David was Margaret's old neighbor who had become some sort of helper. He would check on her regularly and help her with the chores. The police called his cell phone several times, but were unable to reach him. To their surprise, David was found hanging around Margaret's home as the investigation was going on. When officers asked him why he was outside the house, David told them that he was concerned about Margaret and wanted to know what was going on. David was acting suspicious, and things only got worse when police overheard him telling someone he was nervous because his fingerprints would be found all over the house. Acting on these suspicions, the police brought David in for questioning 2 days after Margaret's body was found. He told investigators that he loved Margaret and that he had visited her house on April 8th, the day before she was found. He knocked for a while, but got no response and was troubled. David's story didn't help to clear the suspicions around him. However, he agreed to carry out a DNA test. Police wanted to know if his DNA would match the DNA found on the gloves in Margaret's backyard. When the test results came in, investigators learned that it was not a match. David was able to further clear the suspicions around him by explaining his whereabouts to the police. Since there was no more evidence pointing to David, the police released him and channeled their energy towards finding a new suspect. Investigators would receive a shocker when the autopsy report came in. It was discovered that despite her torn clothes and underwear, there were no signs of sexual assault found on Margaret's body. This discovery would only increase the mystery surrounding the case. In a bid to find more information, the police decided to take a close look into smaller crimes in the area. As they carried on with this strategy, police began to notice a pattern of petty crimes occurring in the neighborhood. One of the crimes was breaking and entering at a construction site. While investigating the case, police recovered a cell phone belonging to the perpetrator. In record time, they were able to trace the phone to a young man named Zachary. When Zachary was brought in for questioning, he told the police that a friend of his named Gavin Ramsey was also involved in the construction site break-in. He also stated that he had committed a string of petty crimes together, and the crimes were all Gavin's idea. 17-year-old Gavin Ramsey was brought in for questioning, but was accompanied by his mom because he was underage. Gavin admitted to breaking into cars and small thefts. A short while into the confession, he asked his mother to leave the room before admitting to a more serious crime. He told the police that he had recently carjacked a man whom he met on a dating site called Grindr. Grindr is famous among the members of LGBTQIA+ community and is often used when people just want to meet up and have casual flings. According to Gavin, he had told his 40-year-old carjack victim that he was 17 years old and wasn't looking to hook up. What the man didn't know was that Gavin was only talking to him with the motive of stealing from him.
He's a 40-year-old man trying to get with a 17-year-old, so I was just going to rob him.
When they met up, they were sitting in the man's car when the man asked Gavin if they should take their conversation into the back seat. Gavin agreed, and then, as the man got out of the driver's seat to get into the back seat, Gavin grabbed the opportunity and locked the car doors from inside. To the man's surprise, Gavin immediately drove off and left him stranded on the street. While speaking to detectives, the 17-year-old tried to excuse his crimes by telling them that the man knew he was a minor and was still willing to meet up with him for sexual purposes. Although Gavin had admitted to a number of crimes, he repeatedly denied having anything to do with Margaret's murder. The detectives were not satisfied. They believed he was hiding something, and so they confiscated his phone with his mother's permission. A look through Gavin's phone would reveal the most shocking detail in the case. Detectives found an app on Gavin's phone called Dark, and with the passcode murder, they opened the app. What they found on the app turned out to be the answers to all their unanswered questions about Margaret's murder. They found several pictures and videos taken in the early hours of April 5, 2018, when Gavin broke into Margaret's home. It turned out that as Gavin broke into the house, he found Margaret sleeping on her couch and decided to make videos of her. All of a sudden, Margaret woke up and was startled by his presence, so Gavin pounced on the old woman and strangled her to death. But that wasn't all. The videos showed that after murdering Margaret, Gavin spent the next hours assaulting her lifeless body. With this discovery, the police brought Gavin back for further questioning. As soon as he got into the interrogation room, Gavin began to cry and act weirdly, even when the detective had not asked him any questions. He eventually confessed that he had snuck into Margaret's home, and when asked what his motive was for breaking into her house, he had this to say.
The whole breaking into the house, that was the adrenaline part. I think, I don't know, I didn't even have a grip on reality whenever I did that.
Gavin's crimes had come to light at this point, but he refused to tell detectives what he did after he killed Margaret. Armed with his confession and the evidence recovered from his device, Gavin was arrested for murder. When police searched his house, they found more irrefutable evidence, including a glove identical to the one found in Margaret's house and Margaret's missing wallet. But the most horrifying evidence they found was Gavin's journal, in which he had written disturbing details about serial killers and his fantasies about assault and murder. The contents of this journal showed the darker side of Gavin, his desires, and his willingness to commit more heinous crimes if given the opportunity. With all the evidence found against him, Gavin Ramsey was charged with murder and a number of other lesser crimes. He was tried as an adult. During his trial, Gavin's mother testified that he had been seeing a counselor for years and that a doctor had prescribed him a drug that drastically changed his character for the worse. Her testimony, however, didn't hold any water. 17-year-old Gavin Ramsey was ultimately convicted of all charges and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. It's not every day that you find a strong and independent 98-year-old like Margaret Douglas. Although she didn't make it to her 100th birthday, Margaret will forever remain in the hearts of her family members.